Human geography of Europe, part 2. Well, part 1 dealt with the population. This is part 2. We'll deal with the economy. Let's get started. All right, so Europe's economy is a lot like the economies of other Western industrializations. When we think about North America, it's very similar to North America and Canada in the fact that it is very diverse and is experiencing a lot of change. Number one, Western Europeans, most Western European countries, which is what we'll see illustrated by this arrow. So the countries that are pretty much going from Germany through Italy west to Spain, these are what we would call Western European countries, okay? Their economies are very similar to our country economy, very similar to Canada's, in that they are basically market economies based on capitalistic. They're basically market or capitalistic economies. The economic systems in these countries are run by businesses which are privately owned, and production and prices are determined by supply and demand. So in the Western countries, in the countries in Western Europe, the ones that are indicated by these arrows, the businesses are owned, the industries are owned by the businesses, and the market prices are determined by supply and demand. Now, when we start talking about the countries going to the east, from Poland east, these countries, it's a little bit different. These countries were at one time command economies, but in the past 20 years, though, they have made the switch to market economy. So as you can imagine, it has been they are currently in a period of transition. And if you remember back to the first video, I mentioned that the Industrial Revolution had occurred in Western Europe approximately 150 to 200 years before it occurred in Eastern Europe. So Eastern Europe has been perpetually caught up. They're perpetually in a catching up state, it seems like. So these countries in Eastern Europe are attempting to build democracies and market economies. Up until about 25 years ago, they were command economies with communist governments. And once again, we mean the countries of the former Eastern Bloc, Latvia, Poland, Belarus, the Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, those countries. At one point in time, up until about 25 years ago, Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic, these countries were at one point in time, up until about 25 years ago, communist countries with the command economy. So the next concept we will cover for Europe is manufacturing. And there are a couple of different types of manufacturing in Europe. This graphic illustrates heavy manufacturing or heavy industry. And heavy industry or heavy manufacturing is the manufacturing of heavy things. I know that sounds kind of Captain Obvious when I say that, but when we mean things like machines, okay, when you build machines and industrial equipment, heavy industry, it needs raw materials like coal and iron, which were found a lot in the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. Now, the second type of industry that we see, which is represented by the ladies in this illustration, they're putting together some cans. Looks like it's a food processing plant. Is light industry. And light industry is the making of textiles, which are clothing, or processing food. So in these places that have light industry, they generally do not have the raw materials available, the coal, the steel, the iron ore to have heavy industry. So these areas are lacking raw materials like the Netherlands and Denmark. So they specialize in the manufacturing of textiles or processing food because they naturally do not have, in those areas, they do not have the natural resources to support heavy industry. Also, Western Europe is represented by, or most of Europe actually, is represented by this sector, which is represented more of a white-collar worker, which we see service or the service industry. We're referring to things like you see in America, in investments, in investment banking, things dealing in finance, doctors, lawyers, technology, kind of what we refer to as white-collar jobs. So the service and technology industries, which are represented by this picture, when we say white-collar, when you hear a white collar or a blue collar job, think about this. Oftentimes when people work in manufacturing and they work in factories, they wear a uniform, or if they're working like in a construction zone or that kind of thing, a lot of times people wear uniforms, and they have a blue uniform collar. So if you're doing that kind of work, it's blue collar. But when you think about manufacturing, things like a doctor or a lawyer, someone who works at a bank, that kind of thing, you think their shirts have white collars because they generally wear dress shirts. And if you take a look at the people in this graphic, is why I chose it, you'll see that the way they're wearing, it's white collars. So service and technology industry, traditionally white collar jobs, or what we think of as white collar jobs. Most Europeans work in these, okay? About 60% of Western Europeans work in the service industry. And some of the major service industries of Europe are international banking and finance. What that means is that when you're banking and buying and investing, work across country lines. Insurance, tourism, and computer products, software, computer repair, all those things. Now, the next concept we'll cover will be the agriculture of Europe. And Europe is, once again, I want you to go back and think, just kind of remember what I mentioned previously, is that Western Europe is a little bit further advanced as well. There's some areas a lot further advanced than Eastern Europe for any number of reasons. One, the Industrial Revolution was there about 150 to 200 years in Western Europe before it was in Eastern Europe. Also, too, for a long period of time, Eastern Europe was predominantly a command economy with a communist government, and they're now making the transition to a market economy with a democratic government like what you see in Western Europe. So the first thing we'll take a look at is when we see the map for agriculture. Of course, this is a map of Europe, and we'll talk about which parts of the continent specialize in the different types of agriculture. And the first part is what we see. Most Europeans, they earn a living from farming more Europeans earn a living from farming than any other economic activity. Europe's crops vary from area to area. So first, let me explain this, okay? In the previous earlier in the video, but previous slide, I talked about how the 60% of the people work in 60% of the people in Europe work in white collar jobs. But here I just stated that more Europeans work in farming than in any industry. So let me go back and explain it. If you break it down by all of the industries that make up service industries, we're talking about computers, banking, all that stuff. You add that together, that's about 60%. There's not one industry that by itself is 60%. So it's a bunch of small industries that make up white collar jobs or service industries, and that is about 60% of the workforce of Western Europe. But the occupation that has the single largest percentage of the population is farming. Even though the majority of the people are not in farming, the vast majority of Europeans are not in farming. But if you have to choose any one occupation, there are more people who are farmers than people who are doctors, or people who are lawyers, or people who are computer engineers. Now, when you add up doctors, lawyers, computer engineers, software developers, all that, a lot more than them there are farmers, okay? So hopefully I clarified that. Denmark and the Netherlands. These and what I attempted to do was to have the letters correspond with the circle. So you see Denmark and the Netherlands, they're here. Their specialty in agriculture is dairy. The Northern Plains, right about here, their specialty are wheat, rye, and livestock. And the Mediterranean area, we're talking about Greece, Italy, the Mediterranean islands, they specialize in olives and citrus fruits. And the Scandinavian countries specialize in fish. Right around here, they specialize in fish. So a couple of different farming techniques, and this brought me to what I was attempting to set up, brings me to what I attempted to set up earlier when I was discussing Western and Eastern Europe. So Western European farmers, because it's more advanced in Western Europe, it's been more advanced for the reasons I stated earlier. They use more advanced methods of technology, and that allows them to be more efficient with their farming resources. Mixed farming is very common in Western Europe, and it's when you use several different kinds of crops and livestock on the same farm. I'm sure you guys remember this from middle school. or maybe even biology. You talk about that. By doing that, it allows you to always use the land, and also at the same time replenish the land by planting different crops on the land during different seasons or during different years. Also in Western Europe, they have what are called farm cooperatives. And farm cooperatives are this. These are just a group of farmers or organizations where the farmers, they share in the growing and selling of products. And by doing this, by pooling their funds together, their resources together, they're able to take advantage of the economies of scale, and they are able to reduce costs and thereby increasing profits. So by working together, they're able to put more money in their pockets. And the next concept that we'll cover deals with the farming concepts in Eastern Europe. And of course, you'll see in this map, the countries in green are the countries that will make up Eastern Europe. But let me go back real quick, make sure I explain this. Of course, these countries in blue are Western Europe. These are the countries that make up Western Europe. And now it makes a little bit more sense when I go here. And there you go. The countries in green are the countries that make up Eastern Europe. The former Soviet Union or former Soviet bloc, Latvia, we're talking about Poland, Czechoslovakia, those countries, okay? These countries in green. Now, the Eastern European farming, up until about 25 years ago, they were under communism. And the farmers, they didn't own their land. They worked on government-owned farms, and because communism is very inefficient and command economies are very inefficient, it was outdated equipment, which means that they produced a very low crop yield. What that basically means, very inefficient. Okay, what they used in Eastern Europe during that time are called collective farms, which means that the farmers did not own their farms. On collective farms, they receive wages plus a share of the products and profits, but the government owns the farms. State farms, in the state farm, the farmers do not receive any profits from the crop on a farm. They are just paid like factory workers. Now, the shift to democracy has caused an increase in private ownership of the land. Also, it's caused greater efficiency with farming in Eastern Europe. So we've seen in the past 20 to 25 years, more modern equipment being used, more modern techniques being used in farming in Eastern Europe, also in food production. The European Union. This map illustrates the countries that make up the European Union. You might have heard that on the news before. You may even heard me mention the European Union before, but just kind of take a quick look at this map. These are the countries in light blue. They represent, they're members of the European Union. Once again, notice Switzerland is neutral. Right in the middle, it's neutral. And they're not a member of it. And what the European Union is, it's basically it's an economic agreement very similar to what we have in the United States when we discuss NAFTA, but the economic agreement with the United States, Canada, and Mexico, except they have taken it, the European Union have taken our trade agreement, our economic agreement with Canada and Mexico, and have taken it to a completely different level. What the European Union does, it brings greater economic and political cooperation between its member nations in Europe. Combined, all of these countries combined have one of the world's strongest economies. And they very similar. They do not tax. There are no taxes on members' goods or the goods from the members of the European Union. If they're taxed at a lower rate than non-members. The member nations of the European Union are Ireland, the United Kingdom, Ireland, United Kingdom, Sweden, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Denmark, Poland, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, Austria-Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Italy, Greece, Luxembourg, Germany, the Netherlands, France, Spain, Portugal, Malta, and Cyprus. Pretty much, as you can see, all of Western Europe. The European nations have become increasingly interdependent nations like the states of the United States. So what is starting to happen is these countries are increasingly interdependent on one another for economic reasons. And so we're starting to see that they're starting, instead of acting like independent countries, they're starting to act more like members of one giant country, like we see the states in the United States act. Now, the European Free Trade Organization is a different type of organization. It's made of the non-members of the European Union. The European Euro. The euro. That will be the next concept that we'll cover. And what the euro is, it is just the currency that is used by the European Union. The currency of the 17 European Union countries, they all accept it. And once again, this is the map. These countries all accept it. Not all of the countries in the European Union accept the euro. The majority of them do, plus countries, a large number of the countries in Africa and other countries around the world. So the euro, which is the form of money, and this is actually what 1 euro looks like. This is 1 euro dollar, and this is 5, 10, 20, 50, 100, 200, 500 euros. Euro banknotes and coins, they have been in circulation right now for a little bit over 10 years, since January 1st of 2002, and they're used by about 330 million Europeans. That is about the size of the United States, plus an additional 150 million people use the euro worldwide. So there are more people that use the euro than use on a daily basis than we have in the United States. The dollar is still the standard currency in the world, but the euro is number 2. But there are more people in Europe using the euro than we have in the United States using the dollar. Currently, trading for the euro, and people trade money, or when we refer to an exchange rate. Currently, the euro is trading at 1.33 euro is worth $1. So currently, the average 1 euro is worth more than $1. The next concept we'll cover when it comes to Europe will be the highways. And Europe actually has a very well-developed infrastructure. In a lot of ways, as good, if not better than the United States. Really, it's better than ours. We're lagging behind in certain aspects of our infrastructure when it comes to Europe. And there's certain things we do better, but there's certain things definitely that Europe and the rest of the world does better in terms of infrastructure. Europe has a very well-developed highway system. It links all of Europe's, or the majority of Europe's major cities. The Autobahn is Germany's famous 4-lane superhighways. There are no speed limits on the Autobahn, so you can just get on that boy and go. So now, on the flip side, there are no speed limits on the Autobahn, so you can cut through Germany going 100 miles an hour. If you hit something, it is over with for you. So do with it as you will. Europe has the highest number of automobile drivers in the world, except for the United States. Europeans also have a very well-developed system of motorbikes, and using motorbikes and bicycles. They have a very rich history of that. So that's more of a part of their daily life, of riding motorcycles and bikes around Europe. Definitely more than we have here in the United States. And that brings us to another part of Europe's infrastructure, which are the railways. Europe's railway system, their railroads, their railroad infrastructure, as far as passenger railroads, is much more advanced, much further along, much better developed than what we have in the United States. So railroads in Europe, they do not just transfer freight like they here in the United States. They transport people. These pictures are of the high-speed railroad systems. So they are the high-speed, and what they do is they're actually cheaper than flying by airplane in Europe. Also in certain parts of Asia, they can go up to 100, 150 miles an hour, and you get on those and you go. So a lot of Europeans travel using high-speed railway. This is actually a map illustrating it's not so much a map, but it shows the United Kingdom, the high-speed rail train that goes underwater from Great Britain. It goes under the English Channel, so it's a tunnel. It's tunneled underneath the English Channel to Paris. So this is just another example of the types of things that they have in Europe as far as their high-speed railway, their infrastructure, It links the majority of the major cities in Europe. And TGVs, or what they call high-speed trains, they were introduced by France. They cause less damage to the environment, so they're very eco-friendly for all of you greenies out there. And they're more economical than travel. The TGVs, they connect Paris and London by passing beneath the English Channel. And they also, though, connect pretty much all of Europe's major cities. And it is probably, and it rivals airplane flights as far as the way the people in Europe travel. That brings us to the seaports and waterways of Europe. Bam. So this first graphic, it just illustrates, it actually tunes in a little bit too to what we discussed as far as the railroads. But the major ports in Europe, the first map shows the major ports in Europe. The first part, if you see it, shows the major ports in the major cities in Europe. And it goes back to illustrate how well developed Europe's infrastructure is. And you take a look at the bottom, you'll see that the major ports are all developed by railroads. And in most cases, high-speed railroads. So not only can you transport freight, but you can also transport people. Europe handles more than half of the world's international shipping at its ports. And the major ports in Europe, they include London, England, Antwerp, Belgium, Genoa, Italy, etc. Just take a look at the map. Please remember, highlight the answers to the homework learning targets in your notes guide. Answer the questions in bold lettering. Have a good evening. See you in class.